Enterprise USA. Its sole purpose is to promote family businesses in America and to promote their economic growth and their job growth. So in addition, as Marty knows, I lobby for tax issues in DC. And at the end of this presentation on our annual family business survey, I'm happy to talk about what's happening in DC. Not much is happening, and talk a little bit about politics and what's possible at the end of the year. So as I mentioned, Family Enterprise USA is family businesses across America. We do a lot of research, but every year we do a survey, and this is our 2020 survey that actually just came out. Family Enterprise USA, as I mentioned, is supported solely by families and family businesses. And in the survey we conducted this year, we got 179 respondents, less than prior years. We do think COVID-19 had something to do with that. It was conducted from early February through April 24th. And some of the questions, you'll see some of the response of the COVID-19. I'm going to skip the survey highlights because I'm going to go through some of those individually. These are the industries that are covered. As you can see, manufacturing at the top of the list with 14% of the respondents, and then real estate, construction, machinery, food and beverage, agriculture at 6%. What most people don't understand, and legislators certainly don't, is the country is really not a country of family farms any longer. And so there are a lot of other industries in our nation other than farms, and yet when we meet with legislators, they always talk about the family farm. If you look at the estate tax returns file, less than 3% of estate tax returns actually include any farming or agriculture assets. So not to say we don't have family farms, but it's less so in America than it used to be. In terms of the number of employees in these businesses that responded, this is typical. They tend to be more on the medium to larger size. And as you can see, 74% of them have over 50 employees. And in fact, 58% of them have over 100 employees. In terms of the number of years that they've been in business, we've never asked this question before, but family businesses see themselves as a legacy. They build their business for their children as a legacy. And so 84% of them are older than 30 years. We're now, sorry we didn't put another column in here, which would have been 50 years and another one with 100 years, because we suspect there are many family businesses in those categories. Jobs added, most of them added at the bottom end of the scale, 1 to 50 jobs in 2019 and 1 to 50 jobs over the last 5 years. In terms of their growth and their revenue, in 2019, you will see that 48% of them had over $50 million in revenue, and 17%, $21 million in revenue. So again, the vast majority of those that responded to this survey tend to be the medium to large size businesses. And in fact, 65% have over 20 million in revenue. When we asked them, did your business grow in 2019? 79% said it did. Now this is lower than last year. So 2019 seemed to be a more difficult year than maybe 2018, but not by much. When we asked them, well, why did your business grow? Not a surprise. They attribute most of that to their strategic business choices that they make, and next to the economic conditions. In terms of what they expect for 2020, interesting, there's even more that are going to be in the over 50%, 49%, as opposed to over $50 million in revenue on an annual basis. 1% more, and even more having $21 to $50 million. We asked them what is their likelihood or that their business is going to grow in 2020. 26% of them said that they're very confident. Now that's down from last year, and I'll explain that in a minute. We asked them again, well, where do you think why do you think that revenue is going to grow? What are the reasons it's going to grow? And 68% believe it's going to be from, again, those strategic business choices that they're going to make. And then less so the economic conditions and the investment. Now at the bottom, you'll see the purple bar, and you'll see that 16% don't believe that they're going to grow at all, because of the coronavirus. And we did see in this survey, as I mentioned, the effects of the coronavirus, quite frankly, not as much as we expected to see. Moving on to business leadership, typically we want the owner of the business, or at least senior managers of the business, to respond to this survey, and very typically that's who we get. As you can see, 51% are sole owners, 35% majority owners. You look at the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that they are top management, so the CEO, the C-suite executives, and such, because we really believe they have a sense of the business to answer the questions. In terms of their commitment to the next generation, interesting that 41% of these business owners have, in fact, given ownership to Generation 2, and 45% Generation 3, and even 29%, Generation 4. In terms of who is operating the business, managing the business day to day, you can see that 47% are in Generation 2 and 49% in Generation 3, and even 27% in Generation 4. So 1/3 of these respondents, in fact, have defied the parable of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And as I mentioned earlier, family businesses certainly see their business as a legacy, and 88% of them, in fact, see their business as a legacy for their children. But when we ask them, well, have you passed the ownership on to the next generation? If you see it as a legacy, then you should be passing it on to the next generation. 53% say no. And you'll see some of the comments, the reasons below, and we find this pretty common. First generation is always reluctant to pass on to second generation, or most of the time, I should say, because they're not sure the next generation is ready. They're not sure that G2 is ready or G3 is ready, or maybe it's not the right time for the business, or they haven't quite figured it out. So, and I think that's pretty typical of entrepreneurs. And they may themselves not be ready to transition. It's like, what am I going to do if I'm not running this business every day? I hear that a lot from family business owners, especially first generation, patriarchs and matriarchs. 65% of them have passed on partial ownership, which is much easier than passing on control, which is 22%, 53% non-controlling interest. When we asked them, what strategy did you use to pass on that business? 84% used a gifting strategy, not surprising. Sale 35%, and then loans 21%. But again, when we ask them, well, do you think that passing on the business is really important to the sustainability of your business? 89% say yes. But then only 53% have actually done it. So there is a disconnect, as I talked about earlier. Business challenges, as I mentioned, 79% said their business grew in 2019, but 81% said their business grew in 2018. So a little down in 2019. We asked them about their confidence for their business in 2020, and 26% are very confident that their revenue is going to grow in 2020, but that number was 33% last year, so there's been a 7% decline. And we asked them about 2019's revenue, how many of them grew by 10% or more. It was only 39%, whereas again in 2018, it was 47% whose business grew by 10% or more. So there was a decline from 2018 to 2019. The top risks they see as being the market recession or the downturn. And at the bottom, you can see the coronavirus clearly is a risk as well. I would suspect that many of them answered coronavirus as a risk, but it's included in the 58%, because I would suspect that, as we've heard and we've all learned, this coronavirus has had a huge economic impact on businesses and certainly family businesses. Market conditions are obviously a big impediment to their growth, and the 15% includes the coronavirus. Top tax concerns. We asked this question almost every year in a different manner, but this year we asked them to rank their top tax. So concern. So they could only answer number one. And in this case, 71% of those believe income tax is their top tax concern. And we think that's the case because you may all recall in the 2017 Tax Act, family businesses were thrown under the bus, in my opinion, because they typically operate through pass-through organizations, not corporations like a C Corp. And so C Corp's got a 21% rate, but family businesses, pass-throughs, got very little relief, and many of them are still paying the income tax rates of 30, 35% as individuals. Second, their concern is estate tax, then capital gains, then payroll taxes, as you can see going down the list. When we ask them what their economic policies, the tax top priorities are, in this case, they could rate each one of them at the top of the list, so they could rate them all if they wanted as all important. And interestingly enough, estate tax came out first at 69%, reducing income taxes second at 67%, and regulation at 66%. We typically ask this same question, and many times reducing regulations is at the top of the list, and eliminating the estate tax is second, income tax. So they flip from year to year, but this year their concern seems to be around income taxes and estate taxes. So on that note, we asked, well, would you rather have the estate tax in particular, would you rather have it repealed, or would you rather have the rate reduced to that of capital gains tax? And they chose to have the rate reduced, and I suspect that's because that makes the tax more manageable, even though 20% is still a high rate of tax. It's not 40%, and it's probably more achievable, certainly in the economic climate that we're in now. In terms of the estate tax, I need to caveat this response that only really 18% of those know how they've had to deal with it in terms of cost or time spent. So at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that those responded to this is a very, very small universe in terms of who responded, anywhere from 16 to 11 people. But in these businesses, and remember, the survey conducted, most of the businesses responding were medium to large-sized businesses. They lost on average 288 jobs a year due to the planning or the payment of the tax, of the estate tax. They paid on average $1.1 million in life insurance premiums to help pay for that tax. And on top of that, they paid accountants and attorneys and lawyers, consultants, another $310,000 to paying for the tax. In terms of the time, this is almost inconceivable to understand. That 50% of them spent 11 to 20% of their time planning and paying for this tax. Again, a small universe of businesses responding to this, but it shows you the impact that this tax can have on the economics of a business.
Those are incredible numbers, Pat. We've got a couple of minutes to go.
All righty. So this is a new question because we always perceived that family businesses pay better in terms of benefits and salaries than non-family businesses. And so we asked them, compare yourself to your non-family businesses, and do you pay above average wages and benefits? And as you can see, 56% say yes, we pay above average, and 40% say we pay average. So again, family businesses, as we tell legislators, take care of their employees and their family members and their shareholders better because they really build their business as a legacy. And when you build your business as a legacy, you pay your employees better because you want to keep them around. Last slide is, as Marty had mentioned in the outset of this, family businesses tend to give locally. And last year, this number was 79%. This year, it's 77%. We suspected this all along, but this is really the last year and this year, the first time we've heard this. We've gotten this data. And the reason this is important is, once again, if a family business has to be sold or shut down, the community really, really is impacted because of not only the jobs that are lost, but the charitable giving that they do in their community.
So it's kind of a double whammy.
Exactly, exactly. So so that's it in terms of the family business. I will comment a little bit on what I see in terms of tax regulation. I don't really see anything going on in terms of legislation this year. That's not a surprise to anybody on the phone. Congress is focused on COVID-19, which they should be focused on. They may try to do some other things, but it doesn't really appear much is going to get done at all. What's going to be really interesting to see is the elections coming up. My suspicions are, as we heard a little earlier, if the economy does rebound and we don't have a huge second wave of COVID and President Trump gets elected, that bodes well for the Senate and Republicans in the Senate. And that is exactly where the game is, because I would agree with the prior speaker, is if the Democrats keep the House, which I suspect they will, because Republicans have to keep all their seats and pick up 21 seats, which doesn't seem like a heavy lift, but it doesn't seem possible. If the Democrats take over the Senate, they can do anything they want to do, because even if President Trump miraculously got back in office with that scenario, they could pass a veto override of anything that he vetoed. It's possible. So really, to keep two parties running this country, which I think is the most important thing to do, the game is in the Senate, and there's four vulnerable seats, and they need 4 seats to take over majority. The Democrats need 4 seats to take over majority. So it's going to be a very interesting election time, but pay attention to the Senate elections.
Hey, Pat, and any thoughts on sentiment in California, since I think you're out there in Orange County, right?
Yeah, we just had 1 seat flip, actually, in Lancaster, flip back to Republican, which I thought was interesting. And so I'm not sure if that's indicative of what's going to happen in Orange County. I mean, Orange County used to be all Republican, and it's flipped, and now it's all Democrat. So I don't know what that means going forward, but I do think COVID-19 is going to play into this election significantly.
Any sentiment on the lock